So I'm Suzy. I'm here representing Habilitation UK, which is the umbrella organisation for habilitation specialists. But in terms of my background, I work at Priestley Smith Specialist School, which is a school in Birmingham for children with a vision impairment. But we are the Birmingham Education Habilitation Service. There's another mouthful. So we support the mobility and independence needs of children right across Birmingham. So any children, whether they're in our school, so Priestley Smith School, whether they're in mainstream school or whether they're in a special provision, we support their mobility and independence needs. That word, habilitation, I hate that word. I think it's really confusing, and I go into schools all the time and I say I'm from the habilitation team and they look at you completely blankly. They never really know what you're talking about. When it used to be mobility and independence, that was sort of the words, then I think people understood it more. So quite often I'll just go in and say I'm the mobility lady, which to all intents and purposes is what I actually am. But I thought I'd come and just give you a little bit of an overview of what, as Habilitation UK, the umbrella organisation, and as a specialist service, what we would expect from a programme of mobility and independence for any child, regardless of their eye condition. It's just that they have a visual impairment, vision impairment. So what is habilitation? So habilitation combines both mobility and orientation training with the teaching of the life skills needed to perform everyday tasks. The skills and strategies taught by habilitation specialists help children and young people with a vision impairment to develop in line with their sighted peers. So our aim is always that they have similar levels of skills as their sighted peers. So it's enabling them in the long term to achieve the greatest possible independence and to maximise their educational outcomes and life chances. Bit of a mouthful. So there is a quality standards, which is, again, it's a sort of umbrella document that gives advice and guidance for what each local authority should be providing for your child. And I've taken these from there. So it's the maximum degree of independent living, the maximum degree of independent travel and mobility, the maximum degree of emotional well-being, including self-determination. So, as was mentioned quite a lot earlier, it's that capacity to be able to talk for yourself and represent yourself as a child and a young person. The maximum degree of social inclusion. It's being able to use tools to aid mobility and independence. And I'm going to be a little bit like a show and tell later on, because I'm going to be holding things up and saying, oh, when they get to this stage, you might want to think about this. Being able to assess risk and identify challenges in mobility and independent living. So there's some of the guidance that's taken from the quality standards document. You can get that online if you want to get a copy, because I think it's quite useful as a parent to be armed as much as possible. So what is habilitation for my child? And it depends. It depends on a range of factors. It depends on how old your child is, because we're not going to be doing the same programme of training for somebody who's 3 or 4 as we are to somebody who's 16. It also depends on where they live. When I trained, our training was in London and we did lots of work on the tube. But now I live in Birmingham, we don't do any work on the tube now, but we do lots on the bus and on the trains itself. How much they can see, because we do a different programme of training for somebody who's partially sighted to somebody who's got very, very reduced vision. But we're also keeping in the back of our minds, particularly for children with BBS, that vision may change, and that what their vision is like now may be different in 3 or 4 years. Do they have any other physical disabilities? So we might work with physios or with OTs for their advice and guidance as well. Do they have any other learning disabilities, which might affect how they go out and about? And what have they already learned, and what are their life experiences? And I think that's a really, really key one when we first go in and assess children, is what they already know and where they already are on their journey. And that's regardless of their age. It's what they've actually done so far, because children differ, they really do, and their family backgrounds differ as well, and I think that's a key one for us to remember as professionals. I hope you've all heard about the curriculum framework, and if you look at the curriculum framework, what I've done here is I've highlighted of the outcomes that the framework has identified, that 2 are specifically habilitation, But the ones that are highlighted in yellow are also something that we cover as part of a habilitation programme as well. So there's only one that isn't, and that's literacy. And again, we might cover it incidentally anyway, because we might be working with the children on using things like the apps that can read the bus timetable at the bus shelters and things like that. So again, I think get hold of your curriculum framework if you haven't already got one. So, onto the nitty-gritty. And I think this is quite useful as parents to know what you should be expecting from your habilitation specialist who's working with your child. So preschool children, we want them up and moving as early as possible. So if it's a baby, we'd be going into the home and we'd be giving suggestions for how your child can move, pushing something in front of them. Whether it's a little baby lawnmower or whether it's a trolley, we want them up and about. Toileting, this is going on to my show and tell. If you're starting out with toileting, you could put a ping pong ball in the toilet. So your little one gets a little bit of a, when they're peeing into the toilet, they get that little sound clue when they hit the ping pong ball. But you've got things like this, which is I bought this for my husband, actually, believe it or not. And it lights up in the night when you put it over the edge of your toilet, and when it's dark, it lights up in the night, so it tells you where the toilet is. And it's little things. That's not specialist. That's just something off Amazon. It worked very well. Cleaning their teeth under supervision at this age. You can get little finger toothbrushes that you can use to clean your teeth. Understanding the world around them. Understanding that what's within their field of vision isn't what there just is. And I think this is something that's really important, is to remember that if your child has reduced vision, just think about how much learning for somebody with full sight is completely incidental, and how much a child with a visual impairment misses because their vision is reduced. And it's the things you don't even think about. And when we're doing a programme of habilitation, you think about things like, what does a margarine tub look like? And if you haven't ever been given the opportunity to feel a margarine tub, whether that's when you're preschool or whether you're older, you're missing out on that little bit of incidental learning. So, using their directional hearing, we really like to check that children can use their hearing to find out where they are in the room. Are they using their hearing? I keep getting in and out the microphone, don't I? Because I'm checking your directional hearing. To make sure that they can understand that different rooms sound different. If they've got no vision or very, very little vision, can they understand that when you've got a drop ceiling, it sounds different to a ceiling that's very high, and that school corridors sound different in different places? Are they listening to the fan that might be a clue as they get older? So it's all about those little clues early on. Being able to get the coat on and off, that's a key one. So when they start school, we don't have the teachers screaming at us saying they can't get their coat on and off and it's taking ages. Understanding direction, back, front, on top of, behind, and their own body parts as well. And we start really early on with the children talking about not just your regular ones like your legs and your arms, but your index finger and your little finger and your thumbs, because they all come into it with children with visual impairments. And it's really, really important that as parents, you support that as well. And your pre-cane skills. And I'll go on to that a little bit more on the next slide. And possibly, and I've put this with using a cane, possibly they might be starting to use a cane. And I'll talk about canes a bit more in a minute. I'm just going to stop before I go on to the next slide and say how massively important it is that you guys as parents are supporting what the HAB specialist does. And if your HAB specialist isn't involving you in your programme, you need to make sure that you are involved, because we can see the difference with children who have got supportive parents and the ones whose parents wrap them up in cotton wool. And I can totally understand why as a parent you would wrap your child up in cotton wool, but the more you can do for your child, the better it is. And that's right from an early age. So, at the end, we talked about a preschool child. I'm now going to go on to a child at the end of year 2. And in the presentation earlier, talking about transition. So we have even more transition phases. We say the first transition phase is when they start school or when they start nursery. And then our second transition stage would be if they're not in a primary school, but they're in an infants and junior school, it would be the transition from infants to juniors. So, at the end of year 2, we would be hoping that a child, and we'd be supporting them to do this, that they can find their way around their own classroom, that they can learn to protect their own body. So when they're moving around the classroom, they're holding out a hand in front of them, And we call this upper and lower body protection. You may have come across it. I hope maybe you've come across it. So we teach different techniques for holding their hands in front of them so they don't bump into the edges of desks and so on. Learning how to use a knife and fork. And when they're little, it might not be with real food. And again, this is something you can do as parents. You can make it into a game. Get some Play-Doh out and a knife and fork and just play with Play-Doh and get them cutting it into things, making it into burgers and sausages and carrots and apples and things like that, and then cutting it with cutting the Play-Doh using a knife and fork, and it smells nice and it's fun and you can do it over and over again. Travelling independently within their school to a set number of places. So for the children who are in our school, we would be encouraging and hoping that children by the end of year 2 can find their way to the toilet, the dinner hall and the playground independently. And we don't mean they're going off with an adult, but we mean that we can send them off and somebody can shadow them, but that they can follow a wall by trailing along a wall if they've got really reduced vision to get from their classroom to the toilet or to the dinner hall, or if they're using a cane, that they can use their cane to get to the dinner hall or the toilet. How to pour a cold drink. So very early on, we introduced the liquid level indicators. And for children who we know their vision may get worse, we'd introduce it early on as well, so that they've got into the hang of using a liquid level indicator. Does everybody know what a liquid level indicator is? Anybody who doesn't? No? So, no? So a liquid level indicator is such a mini gadget, but when you're pouring a drink and you can't see the level of the liquid when it gets to the top of the cup, once or twice a child does it and they've spilt their water and it's just put them off. But this little gadget shows how sweaty my fingers are. All it does is it beeps when you get to the top of the cup. So it's an indication to them that when they pour, they know when to stop, and it's got 2 different levels. So, and again, this is the thing about learning visually, because the first level is for the greater amount of liquid. If you're making squash, you'd have to put your water in first and then you squash. But as a sighted person, you always put your squash in first and then your water. And it's really funny. It's one of those things that you do things from a sighted perspective, but when you've got a visual impairment, you might need to think about how you do it. Going back to doing your teeth, when you've got little children learning how to clean their teeth, they don't need to put it straight onto their toothbrush. They can put it on their finger, into their mouths, and then they can put their toothbrush in their mouths. But you don't do it that way because we do it from a sighted perspective. So you just need to think about how you do things, and we support parents to think about how you might do things. So, how to do zips and buttons, and that's your fine motor control. That's all about using your fingers with your fine motor. So it might not be we're just doing zips and buttons straight away. We might be using something like this, which is just things that you can use to encourage children to use their pincer grip. So, and we might take these little boards out and just turn it all into games. How to use a cane, possibly. Again, I'll say possibly. Using canes. When I trained about 16 years ago, I was one of the first ones to go through the new London course, as it was then. And it was the stage where they'd gone from not introducing canes for children until they're about 8 or 9 years old. But that thinking has very much changed. And as parents of children with BBS, your child might not need a cane early on. But if we can introduce a cane as early as possible, knowing that at a later stage they might need it, or that they're struggling with their night blindness, the quicker you get it introduced, even if you don't think they need it at the moment, children are so much more accepting when they're younger than they are when they're teenagers. And if you start introducing it when they're teenagers, oh God, we have such a battle on our hands sometimes. So I'd really say, work with your HAB person to see if you can introduce a cane early on. But I have put possibly, because you might not be ready as a family, you might not be ready emotionally, your child might not be ready emotionally, but it's just one I think to keep in the back of your mind. We start to think at this age about how to ask for help with their mobility, and that's, do they need a sighted guide? Do they need somebody sometimes just to help them moving around when they can't move around independently if it's somewhere new? And to understand the clock face, because that means that you can start to find your food on a plate. End of year 6, transition stage into secondary. So again, we've got another bit of a jump. And again, I'm saying this, is I've done it as the end of year 6s, but it is, again, just remember it's stage, not age, but we're just using these as a guide. So it's definitely being able to find their way around their classroom, how to find their way further afield in their school without adult support. And that's the stage, by the end of year 6, I would hope children are moving around independently. I work in a resource-based school. There's about 9 children in the resource-based school I go into, and they all find their way along to the resource-based hub independently. Nobody follows them. They find their own way along. Some have got canes, some haven't. We'd be working with them. We do a cooking day in Year 6 for all children. And in our service, we get referrals for all children in Year 6, so we don't miss any. And then we talk to parents about what they might need in terms of support. But we get all the children who want it into school to do a little cooking day. And on the cooking day, we would assess their cutting, their grating, their chopping, their stirring, whether they can use a talking measure or whether they can use digital scales and things like that. Let me get my breath back because I know I talk really quickly because I'm conscious of getting it all in. Understanding money. And children nowadays don't use money, but that's one of the things, again, I'd say, get your kids to have pocket money. Get them used to having a range of coins, because I know that we can all pay for things by debit card, but if you're paying for things by debit card or contactless and you can't see, it's much harder to work out the value of money. But if you're used to identifying coins and notes and finding out a way to identify them, you know, the 5p's and the 10p's, they're silver and they're scratchy. The 1p and the 2p, they're brown and they're smooth. Your 50p's and your 20p's have got the little corners on them. But if you give your children pocket money, they can start to learn all about money and the value of money and that identification. And actually, identifying money on a table in front of you is far easier than getting your purse out and finding the money in your purse and trying to find it under pressure with a shopkeeper staring at you and things like that. So the earlier you do it, the better.
You have to keep using my credit card.
Don't get into that giving money. We'd be working on road safety. That's a key one. Right from sort of Year 4 up to Year 6, we'd be working with children on their road safety, and we'd be encouraging parents to go out and about and work on their road safety at the same time. How to have a shower and a bath and clean your teeth independently. Things like, how does my child know that it's the shampoo and not another thing in the bathroom? So just put a hair bubble around your shampoo so the child knows which is theirs, or have a little basket with all their things in the basket so you're giving them their independence. How to use a long cane, talked about that already, and to adapt it for different settings. So there's different techniques with using a long cane. So again, it's important to get it in as early as possible. Possibly be walking to school independently. I've got a little girl in Year 6 who's got BBS, who is walking to school on her own at the moment, only just started doing it. The first 5-6 times, mum walked behind her, as I did with my kids when they were that age. Walked behind her, was absolutely terrified all the time that she did it, but then she did it. Mum was then able to see that her daughter was capable of crossing a road safely, that she was going to be sensible, and that the strategies we'd suggested for safe road crossing with a visual impairment that her daughter was putting into place. And she was really chuffed. She was dead pleased. The daughter was chuffed, horrified that her mother had followed her on her way home the first couple of times, but really pleased. They might have had some experience of bus travel, because if you think about all children, that jump from Year 6 to Year 7, when you go from primary school to secondary school, and then we throw kids onto buses sometimes and go, right, you've got to catch the bus to school now. Take that and make it tenfold for a child with a vision impairment. If we know they might be catching the bus to school, even if it's a school bus, we want to be in there and making sure that they've had an experience of where to sit on the bus, how you stop the bus, how do you know where your landmarks are on a route? Do you use Google Maps on your phone? Do you use Move It, which is another app on your phone? All those things that if we get it in early, the kids are prepared, that they can tell the time, that they've visited their new school and begun school familiarisation. That's another key one in Year 6, apart from in Scotland, which will be a different year, won't it? Yeah. So excuse me, I'll come in from a very English perspective. Oh, so it is still years. So what age is, so Year 6, it would be 11. So it would be when they get to 11. Yeah, is that all right? Have an age-appropriate understanding of staying safe when out and about, and stranger danger and how to ask for help. And again, I think that's a key one at that age. So, end of Year 11, we would be hoping that children can travel a number of walking, so you've got a big jump. We've just jumped from Year 6 up to Year 11. So there's all the things in between, but we would be hoping that children can travel a number of walking routes independently, whether that's close to school or close to home, but ideally close to home. So we've worked with parents to identify routes that your child might, that it's a meaningful route. It's not just something that we're putting in place because it's close to school, but it's something that we know that will be facilitated on a regular basis and that you can reinforce as a family member. That they can be using public transport independently, including some of the navigation aids that I mentioned earlier. It might be that if your child's got really reduced vision, that you use something like this, which is something that's produced by the West Midlands Transport, and it's just a bus indicator. So if your child's standing at a stop that's got 5 different buses stopping at it, they can hold that up so that the number 50 bus driver knows that they're waiting for the 50 bus. And if they're holding that up with a symbol cane or a cane, that the bus driver should stop and ask your child what bus number they want. But if your child's never practiced getting onto a bus and asking, what bus is this? Oh my goodness, that's absolutely terrifying. So it's one of those skills that we do lots of work on. Keep themselves safe out and about and online. And I think you've had a session on online safety, haven't you? Yeah, thought so. Use a washing machine and a dishwasher. And I know you might get some 16-year-olds, regardless of whether they've got visual impairment, who can't use the washing machine and the dishwasher. But again, going back to your incidental learning, they will have seen you do it. Hopefully they'll have done it as well, but they will have seen you do it. And if you've got a child with reduced vision, they may not have ever seen you use a washing machine. They don't know which buttons to press on the washing machine. They don't know that the drum goes round inside in a washing machine. They don't know where the water comes from, all those type of things. So you have to be more explicit as a parent with what you do in terms of supporting your child. Understand I'm conscious of time. Understand a range of public services. We'll be going out with children and making sure that they understand the banks, the library, the chemist, that they can ask for help in a supermarket and buy items, again, but for your money, but also how do they ask for help with finding things in the supermarket? Making a range of hot and cold drinks, liquid level indicator, using the microwave. In terms of hot drinks, we may not use a regular kettle. I use a travel kettle to teach hot pouring, first of all, because you can just measure 1 cup into it and it's much safer. Or we'd be teaching with the 1 cup machines that everybody has now where you just press a button. But they still need to be able to understand that you might not have a 1 cup machine if you go off to university or whatever. So they need to have the skills in place to be able to pour safely. Self-advocate in a range of settings, which goes back to the previous presentation. Choose appropriate clothing for interviews, for going out to the cinema, that type of thing, and using a long cane effectively, including being able to change your tips and ordering things. So that's up to the end of year 11. I'm not going to do any more. But particular challenges for a child with BBS. So it is that issue of that there may be an ongoing reduction in vision. And so as a service, we are, in terms of our criteria for involvement from our service, we say any child who's likely to have night blindness, reduced visual fields, or that their vision may change, we get referrals for all of them. So we will work with all of them as early on as possible. So we ask for early referrals. Weight problems and gross motor movement. So it might be we're doing a program of gross motor, a program of gross motor skills when they're younger. And we'd work with parents and clinicians as well to see if there's anything else we can do to support. And again, as we talked about that fine motor control, we'd be working with early on. And here comes the question. So, how to secure habilitation input. Is everybody in the room who has a child with a vision impairment, particularly they've got a child with an EHCP, are they all having HAB support? Or is there anybody who isn't? Okay. Do you know whether there is habilitation training in your area?
They're refusing to give it at the moment.
Right. Okay. And has your child got an EHCP?
Yep.
Yeah. So, okay. So I would say on the next EHCP review, the statement that we use for any child who's got, particularly a child with BBS or the other conditions where we know their vision might get worse or they've got night blindness, we use a particular phrase which is at the bottom of here and put it onto all EHCPs. So all of our reports have this statement and it says, Stanley, I just chose that name, is sight impaired, severely sight impaired, and will need to continue developing ability and age-appropriate mobility and independent living skills. He will need regular and ongoing access to support from a registered qualified habilitation specialist to learn new skills and every new route that he may require. So even if that child is on a hold at the moment and we think they've got to an age-appropriate stage in terms of their skills, we still want it on there because we know that in the future they may need that support.
It's written in as the HCP.
And you're still not getting it. So go to guide dogs, see if you can get any for guide dogs. But if it's written into his EHCP...
They're just not... sensory supporting is a little bit...
Right.
Yeah, they first of all said, so we've been with them for about 3 years now since we moved into the area. They were really good to begin with, and since we've gone to the tribunal, we've had a bit of a, oh, we can't actually see him, so they had the QTBI, the QTM side, because he's a deaf-blind child, they were like, we can't come and see him, we can't come and do X, Y, Z with him until we've done an assessment. So they finally did an assessment in March of this year, and I've been waiting for them to start the process again.
Right.
Nothing's happened, and then we've just had an annual review this week, and the QTBI has gone, oh, we were just waiting for the annual review to happen in order to see what we can do. I was like, you're next going to say, we were just waiting for him to go into year 10. Until
Yeah. So I'd be quite tempted to get a hold of equality standards so that you've got it as a tool. So HabVI UK is the umbrella organisation, and you can download it from there. It's on the last slide, the website, I'm hoping, going from memory. If you haven't got it, you can try guide dogs, but you should, if your child has BBS, they should be having habilitation support. So, what am I due to finish now? I think I am, aren't I? Okay, so what can you do as a parent? I've already mentioned this. Remember how much incidental learning is visual. Have that in the back of your mind. Think about a task that you do on a daily basis. And my classic one is cleaning the toilet. And this goes on to so many things. Get hands-on as early as possible. When your kids are about 6 or 7, stick a massive set of rubber gloves on their hands and get them to put their hands down the toilet and understand where the water comes from. And I think that's key. So clean your toilet first. Don't do it when your teenagers have been in it, but get them to feel the toilet, feel the rim of the toilet, because when your child's little, they don't understand where that water comes from. It's blooming terrifying. You sit on the toilet and all of a sudden your water appears. Where does it come from? And where does all the stuff that comes out your body go to? So get them with rubber gloves on, exploring your toilet. And I think that's an absolute key one. Stick their hands in the washing machine and get them to revolve the drum and things like that as much as possible. If you can get your kids learning about the objects that they feel, I think that's really important. Also, and I know a lot of kids with vision impairment are tactilely defensive, so as early as possible, get them feeling things, playing with messy things. Things like shaving foam with a smell in it so that they can feel it. Our early years person has just got the most amazing ideas about getting kids to do tactile things early on. Make a mess. And if you are doing any activities with your kids, if you're encouraging your kids to pour or to spread or to chop or anything like that, mess doesn't matter. Do it on a tray so that the mess is contained, but don't get freaky if your kids make a mess. It doesn't matter at all. And if kids aren't scared of making a mess, they'll be far more inclined to go and do things, and then they'll be independent adults and they won't drive you potty. Explore as much as possible. Your rooms, again, talking about the different sounds in different rooms, encourage kids to listen to sounds. Go out and about as much as possible. And when you're out and about, go for walks, talk about what's going on, touch the things that you're telling them about, explore tactile opportunities, and let your kids run. And that's a really important one from a mobility perspective. I'm working with a mum at the moment. She'd said to me, my son, he keeps falling over. I can't understand why he keeps falling over. And I think I know he's got problems with his visual fields. So we know he's got some peripheral vision loss, but he keeps falling over. And I went and watched him in the school playground, and he ran around like an absolute loon. And he did fall over, but he fell over because he was running around at 100 miles an hour. And I said to the people in the school, I said, is he very often in the first aid book? And they said, no, he's not. So that's tick. For me, that's fine. If he's not in the first aid book very often, that's fine. But he's running around, he's doing what kids should do. And I'd much rather your kids were moving and running and doing all that stuff than you protecting them. let them be independent. That's the same thing, like going to the shop on their own. Follow them if you want to, that's fine, but just let them explore the route to the shop and talk about landmarks and things like that and keeping yourself safe. Encourage them to be organised. Don't put their washing away. Make sure that they put their washing away so they know where their clothes are. If it's labelling their drawers in large print or whatever, do it. Make sure that they're as independent as possible from as early on. Don't leave it until they're 17. And have high expectations. They should do chores. They should make their own drinks. They should make their own snacks. If they're going into school with a packed lunch, get your own drink. Go and do it. Use a liquid level indicator if you want to, but do it. Tidy their rooms, make their beds, pack their own school bag. Get them to do all of those things. And then this is just a lad that I work with. This is my last one. This is Ryan. He's got BBS. I think his mum used to come to a lot of the conferences. He was referred age 7, he did body protection, he did long cane, he did all those cooking skills, lots of transition visits to his new secondary school. By the time he was in year 11, he was catching 2 buses home. It was harder on bin day because he kept bumping into the bins. That was a classic. It was harder at night in the winter, but he achieved it. With lots of practice, he achieved it. And then he was meeting friends in town as an add-on to that. We worked with Mum to ensure that he wasn't just eating junk food, that he was making himself a range of hot and healthy snacks. He's now a whiz with the air fryer. He went to RNC at the end of year 13, and he's just come back with me because he's just started university, and we've been doing some work on his mobility and independence at university. And because he knew me, he asked for me, and so we were able to go in and do his mobility and independence work around there. So it was fantastic. So that relationship with parents as a HAB specialist, I think, is really key. And that's it. Thank you very much.